Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today we're looking at the evolutionary architecture of moral conduct. Basically, we're going to completely reframe human behavior. We're tracking exactly where our concepts of right and wrong actually come from, how they literally kept us alive, and what they mean for us today. Okay, let's dive into this.
So, I want you to really think about this for a second. Why are we actually good to each other? Like when you do a good deed, you help a neighbor out, or you just hold the door for a stranger. What's the actual underlying driver there? If we peel back that first surface layer, the text points out a pretty simple truth about modern life. Generally speaking, we get good results from good deeds. Why? Well, because most people around us naturally reciprocate. They respond to kindness and service with the exact same things in return. We're kind of good, at least in part, because we expect the world to be good right back to us. But what happens if we strip that expectation completely away? Let's step back and see how this actually builds into our deep evolutionary history.
To really understand our moral architecture, the source material asks us to rewind millions of years. We have to completely strip away all the safety nets of modern society. No grocery stores, no police, no hospitals, nothing. Millions of years back, the environment was incredibly dangerous and, frankly, just deeply uncertain. Early humans were absolutely not living in a world where being kind guaranteed you a warm smile in return. They were running entirely on raw survival mechanisms. And in that terrifying, totally unpredictable past, being good or altruistic was an incredibly risky proposition.
This really highlights our core evolutionary conflict. Think about how we act today. Our modern world is largely built on reciprocity, kindness, community. But jump back to prehistoric life, and early humans were locked in a constant state of fight or flight for the vast majority of their time. If you're constantly dodging predators, fighting off starvation, and battling the elements, expending your precious energy and resources just to be good to someone else, well, it doesn't immediately make sense for your own individual survival, does it?
And that brings us right to the core of the survival problem. Goodness is risky. We're talking about early humans facing scenarios where they needed to do things for the society that were incredibly difficult and challenging, but with absolutely zero guaranteed returns. Think about it. If you shared your hard-earned mammoth meat, or you stepped up to defend a weaker member of your group from a predator, you literally might not survive the night. That is a tremendous amount of personal risk. So the text poses a vital question here. Without the modern guarantee of reciprocity, why would a human brain, which is hardwired to survive, ever choose to do something that risks its own safety for someone else's benefit?
Well, the answer, according to the source material, is born out of absolute necessity. There desperately needed to be an evolutionary deterrent. Early humans required a mechanism strong enough to completely override those basic, selfish survival instincts. They needed this powerful motivation that acted as a two-way street, simultaneously working as a deterrent to prevent selfish, immoral acts, while also acting as an enabler for good behavior. Without this vital motivation, early human societies simply could not function, let alone thrive in such a hostile environment. They needed a massive push to compel them toward the broader welfare of the group.
So, how in the world did our ancestors solve this seemingly impossible problem? The source suggests a fascinating sociological solution: the higher power motivation. Now, just to be super clear, the source material frames this not as a theological debate at all, but strictly as a necessary evolutionary and sociological survival tool.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the framework it lays out. It breaks down into 3 logical steps. Step 1. Early humans are facing these massive, risky, challenging tasks without any guaranteed return from their peers. So step 2, they conceptualize a higher power. They begin to create the concept of a divine force that actively watches and rewards good behavior. And finally, step 3, by doing this, they achieve a clear direction for societal welfare. Suddenly, there's a guaranteed return on investment. The life-threatening risk of being good is mitigated by the promise of a cosmic reward, pushing people to actually step up for the welfare of the society as a whole. The text puts it incredibly clearly, stating that early humans needed to conceptualize a higher power that always looks after people who does good things and who helps people making positive contributions. This concept was an absolute game changer. It meant that even if your neighbor didn't reciprocate your kindness today, or heck, even if you died protecting your tribe, that higher power would make sure your good deed was recognized. It provided a desperately needed compass, giving at least a few people a clear direction to risk themselves for the greater good in what was otherwise a totally terrifying world.
But of course, the story doesn't just end with ancient history. We've looked at the ancient need for evolutionary deterrents and the promised rewards of a higher power. But as we move forward, the text challenges us to evolve our understanding past those historical survival mechanisms. It brings us into the ultimate concept: Goodness for its own sake. The idea of modern intrinsic value.
Let's think about these deep principles of integrity: being honest, sincere, trustworthy, reliable, responsible, caring, disciplined, accountable, committed, brave. The source makes a really powerful argument here. It states that these specific traits, these noble virtues, are things an individual needs to possess entirely, regardless of whether they are getting a good return or not. We've evolved past the point where we need a guaranteed payout, either from our neighbors or from a conceptualized higher power, just to justify holding on to these core human values.
So the crucial point is understanding the difference between dependent and independent goodness. Dependent goodness is that prehistoric model we just talked about, morals and ethics that rely entirely on the promise of a reward or the fear of a punishment. But independent goodness, that flips the script completely. The text firmly asserts that true morals, ethics, and principles cannot be dependent on external carrots or sticks. Integrity has to be independent. It must be an intrinsic, noble trait that you hold simply because it's the right way to exist.
And this brings us to the ultimate takeaway from our evolutionary journey today. The source concludes with a truly profound thought regarding these moral traits. They are noble causes to live for by themselves, whether one believes God or not. It just beautifully ties together this entire evolutionary architecture we've been mapping out. We needed the concept of reward and punishment to survive our dangerous past. But the ultimate pinnacle of our moral evolution is recognizing that goodness requires absolutely no external justification.
Which leaves us with one final, highly provocative thought to close out this explainer. Are you good for the reward, or are you just good? Next time you do a good deed, maybe you hold the door or help a friend move, I really want you to think about that evolutionary architecture inside your own mind. Are you secretly operating on that ancient, dependent system, waiting for a return on your investment? Or have you reached that independent level, living out those noble causes simply for the sake of being good? It is a tough question for sure, but it's one that ultimately defines who we truly are. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring those concepts.